Rick, I want to start with you as a former intel official yourself. Let's discuss how likely it is that we'll see a peace deal actually between Ukraine and Russia based on what we're seeing today. And let's hear from President Trump first.
I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance.
Rick, President Trump just posting on social media that he began the arrangements for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, and after that, for a trilateral summit. What is the potential we're going to see a trilateral meeting, and what is it hinging on right now from your perspective?
Well, I think things are certainly moving in the right direction. Things have gone exponentially better since Friday's meeting. At the end, look, the odds aren't still great. They're certainly much better, but they've improved from what was nearly zero. I think the lens here is, Trump's been able to combine both diplomatic moves and what was coming out of Alaska with incredible follow through today. I mean, just having all the European leaders. I mean, that's just, I think that's historical. I don't think that's ever happened in our history. And on top of that, the $100 billion defense deal financed by Europe, that's gonna, that's gonna go a long way, at least getting the congressional support that's going to be required if to continue to move at least the U.S. optic, the U.S. support towards a longer term peace deal. I think, like I said, I think we're in a better position today, but Putin unfortunately has a really bad habit of, up until the last moment, agreeing and saying yes, and then very quickly going in a completely different direction.
John, I want to get your thoughts. President Zelensky wouldn't directly answer if he'd redraw the maps, conceding territory. How good of a chance is there for peace without Ukraine ceding land? And what leverage might President Trump be holding in this situation when it comes to Putin?
Ultimately, Zelensky will really have no choice but to concede the land swaps. I mean, right now, we know that Crimea has been in Russian hands since 2014. So have the major regions in the Donbass since 2014, the first Russian invasion of Ukraine. And let's remember, Steve, that at that time, it was President Obama who said that it was not worth those territories going into a possible wider war with Russia to defend Crimea and the Eastern Oblast. That was President Obama in 2014. And right now, Russia is sitting on about a 600-mile-long, triple-layered strategic in-depth defense line that's protecting those eastern oblasts from Ukrainian counteroffensive operations. There's really no chance there's going to be any serious movement against Crimea, but the problem becomes democratically within Ukrainian society, it's extraordinarily difficult at the beginning of the process to give away concessions to Putin without getting anything back. So in the end, there will be territorial concessions. It's just not smart for Zelensky to say anything along those lines at this point, at the beginning of the peace process.
Harry Kazianis, if you could weigh in on those boundaries, where things could go. Media is also reporting that Trump and Putin spoke for about 40 minutes on a phone call this afternoon at some duration while those world leaders were still at the White House. What do you think Putin is likely taking away from today's meeting?
I think he has the right to be kind of nervous. I mean, as your guests have pointed out, what happened today was historic. It'll go down in the history books as one of the biggest national security meetings in maybe perhaps the 21st century, maybe even more. I think for Putin, the fear is that he's done the thing he's always been probably most worried about. He's united Europe. I mean, Donald Trump has pulled off something quite miraculous in that now NATO is going to be spending 5% of GDP on defense. Trump had a hard time getting them to 2%, and that's what a war will do. But I think if we broaden this lens out and look out a little bit further, my concern, I think more than anything else, and I think your guests and Putin and Trump probably share the same viewpoint, is that what is the quality of this peace going to look like? I think really what we're looking at is probably a giant frozen conflict. I don't think we're going to have any grand peace treaty signed that the Senate's going to approve or anything like that. I think what we're looking at probably longer term is something more like the Korean War, which a lot of analysts have pointed out. An armistice, neither side really wanting to agree to who formally controls what territory, because that's too politically complex and dangerous for Russia and Ukraine. So I think you see maybe some sort of demilitarized zone. And I think that's why we're starting to see a lot of talk about security guarantees, because the Ukrainians, if they're going to agree to some sort of lines being frozen similar to what they are now, they're going to need to make sure that their military has been reconstituted, that Europe and the United States would back them again if Russia ever decides to reach out and try to get more territory. So I think for everybody, for Putin, for Trump, this is going to get a lot more complex in the weeks and months ahead. And I don't think we're going to see some sort of grand bargain happen, even in the weeks and maybe even, many weeks to come. This is going to be a long process, so we should get ready.
I think you raise a very important point, Harry, that region, the Donbass in question, it's a very complicated region and dates back to, who owns what and whose territory is it pre-Soviet era. John, France and Germany are pushing for a ceasefire, but President Trump isn't sold on it just quite yet. Let's take a look.
If you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, one country or the other wouldn't want it.
John, besides the obvious to stop the killing, what significance do you think there is in Germany and France pushing for the ceasefire? And what is the strategy behind Trump pushing back?
Well, I think on the first front, Steve, there's a sense of solidarity that Germany and France and a number of other European Union countries are wishing to express with Ukraine. And Zelensky's made very clear that he is pushing for a ceasefire, not for a political settlement that'll bring about an end to the immense cascades of missile attacks, rocket attacks, and artillery shell firing on Kyiv, on other major Ukrainian cities, killing so many Ukrainians and devastating Ukraine's energy infrastructure and so much of its economy. And I think that's what Zelensky is looking for first. And that does not require any major negotiation or any major concessions. That's really part of the political settlement. The problem is that Vladimir Putin believes that a ceasefire is going to give Ukraine the opportunity to rearm, to refresh its exhausted troops. Keep in mind that the average age of the Ukrainian soldier is around 42, 43 years old. And Putin wants a political settlement that is permanent, probably along the lines of the Istanbul Agreement of March 22. And I really don't know that there's a unified European position here. Steve, that's the problem that the EU faces right now. The EU itself and NATO are fractured. I mean, countries like Hungary and Poland have rejected the EU sanctions regime on Russia. And it's kind of surprising that neither Turkey, which is really the most effective European mediator between Russia and Ukraine, and Poland, which is really the great new frontier for Europe against any possible Russian aggression in the future, were both absent from today's meetings.
Rick, to John's point, earlier point, before the meetings taking place today, at least 10 people, including a child, were reportedly killed in Russian attacks on 2 Ukrainian cities. Let's play another clip from President Trump.
And we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again.
What kind of options, Rick, do you think President Trump is considering to make sure the peace is long term, and how will it be ensured to endure the test of time even after President Trump may leave office?
Sure. So I think by getting NATO commitment, NATO involvement, and discussions regarding invoking Article 5, if Russia were to reinvade Ukraine or continue its hostilities past whatever agreement is finalized, that's certainly a very different approach than having, say, deployed troops along a border like you've seen the other example along the North Korean South Korean border where there is an armistice. The goal is not to have those be U.S. troops, but I think if that area of Ukraine is opened up again to European investment, U.S. investment, now the Russians have to think twice whether they want to move into that area and risk actually, perhaps firing upon European or U.S. personnel or companies working in those areas. And then that commitment by the other European leaders shows that they are serious, that if Russia were to go back into Ukraine for whatever reason, they would escalate and take the appropriate action to push them back out. In theory, these things have to withstand the tests of time. Right now, we have an aligned administration in Congress that is willing to support those kinds of efforts. But that could change. And when there's a new president in town, or when the European makeup shifts and changes again, we don't know how much that will actually stand up. As a reminder, when Ukraine gave up its nuclear missiles at the end of the Cold War, those were the kinds of promises that the United States under the Clinton administration had promised Ukraine, that they would support them, that they would protect them, that they would provide them access to NATO systems. And NATO support. And now you fast forward, to recent times, and that wasn't really the case, was it? So to the extent that this could be somehow ratified in something concrete, that's great. And I think the president has every right to pursue, bypass the ceasefire focus and go into something a lot more lasting. But again, it's really up to Putin in so many ways to adhere to those rules and stop firing missiles into Ukraine.
Harry, this is obviously a very sensitive period of time where all parties are still keeping their cards close to the vest. President Trump earlier today, much of this from us watching from the outside is trying to read between the lines. When it came to some type of security alliance, in Ukraine, Trump saying that he would support the Europeans. Do you see a combat-ready presence of American troops involved in this agreement, or will it be more of a supporting role?
No, I have to be very frank with you. I do not see a U.S. troop presence or a quote-unquote boots on the ground in Ukraine. I think you would see a revolt in the MAGA base. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene would be on Twitter within 30 seconds of hearing anything like that. And I think you'd see a lot of people on the right, not even people who are necessarily MAGA. Actually, Nikki Haley, who is as far from MAGA as you could be, a traditional Mitt Romney style Republican, literally put out a tweet saying she would actually be against U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. So I think a lot of Republicans would be against that, and the president would have a really tough sell trying to drive that point home. But I think there's a tremendous amount the United States can do. I mean, we are the arsenal of democracy, as President Trump likes to point out time and time again, and he's correct. We build some of the finest military arms on the planet. I mean, Ukraine's needs in terms of reconstituting its military are vast. They're going to need an army. They're going to need a navy. They're going to need an air force. There's a lot we can learn from Ukraine in terms of all their drone technology and the like. So I think there's an opportunity for both sides to learn from one another. Obviously, U.S. defense contractors can come in there and fill the void. There's this talk now that one of your guests mentioned about a $100 billion deal where Europeans would buy U.S. arms. I'm sure that would be things like probably Boeing's new F-15EX Eagle II fighter, which is one of the best on earth. That's probably one that Ukraine would be looking at. I've heard rumors for years about Ukrainians asking for the F-35. That might be, too far afield, but it's something I've heard that's been rumored out in Washington circles for a while. So there's a tremendous amount we can do to backstop Ukraine and do something that Vladimir Putin would be terrified. Turn Ukraine into essentially a security porcupine. So if Russia ever reached out and tried to gobble up more of Ukraine, they would get hurt pretty badly. And I think that's a strategy that Trump is trying to employ with Taiwan and other places. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it can really work in real world scenarios.